Welcome to Making the Familiar Strange. Thank you all so much for joining us on this beautiful day. I know it would probably be the perfect day to go for a walk during your lunch break or the middle of the day or whatever. So we feel very blessed and privileged to have all of you joining us here. My name is ZimmerMas, and I'm Tri-Faith's Education and Program Associate. And in this program, I'm here to welcome you, to remind you of how Making the Familiar Strange works, and to assist our special guests in whatever ways they prefer. So let's remember our goals for this program, which are to take a look at Abrahamic stories together and to take on new perspectives by looking at familiar or sometimes less familiar stories with fresh eyes and new points of view. So today I'm excited that we have Ariella Rohr of Temple Israel to share her unique perspective on the story of the Jewish holiday of Purim. Before we get started, remember our usual ground rules, which are to be respectful, to remember or to reconsider what assumptions you might be bringing to this story. Speak from your own point of view rather than on behalf of a larger group of people. So remember to use those I statements. And keep in mind that in looking at these nuanced stories, we're all trying to hear and consider a new perspective that might be different from our own. And it's okay if we don't completely agree with it. Next month, on March 22nd, we're going to have Deb McAllister sharing about the Christian story of the Samaritan woman at the well. But for today, as I mentioned, we'll be hearing Ariella's perspective on a story from the Book of Esther. She's asked me to watch the chat for her and let her know about any questions or comments that you post in there, particularly when she opens things up for discussion. So at those points, I'll voice the things that are in the chat, but please also participate in whatever way is most comfortable for you, whether that's through the chat or by unmuting yourself to share a comment or a question or whatever you have. And also another note, Ariella's presentation includes some playful examples comparing elements of the story to alcoholic beverages, but we recognize that there are people who don't drink alcohol for a variety of reasons. And so we wanted to note that we aren't endorsing or dismissing anyone's choices related to alcohol. So please participate in whatever way makes you feel comfortable when we get to that portion of Ariella's presentation. All right, Ariella, I will hand things over to you to introduce yourself and dive into this topic. And since I will be sharing slides, I will switch. Gosh, my lighting is horrible. I'm sorry about that. I'll switch what I'm sharing on here.
Okay, hi, I'm Ariella. This is Sophia. She is assisting me today. So I'm mostly a stay-at-home mom. But my background is in formal and informal Jewish education. So formal Jewish education includes things like standing in front of a room, teaching kids Hebrew, pretty straightforward. Informal Jewish education includes things like I used to take teenagers on field trips to Lithuania, and it was amazing and I loved it. But so that's the background I've got. And oh no, I don't want to be spotlighted for myself. Okay, there we go. So there's this Jewish holiday. Oh, so excuse me. There's a Hebrew calendar, and the Hebrew calendar is a little bit weird, and it includes leap years. And I can't explain it all because I don't understand it all. But what I do know is that the leap years are actually involve a leap month, and so all the holidays that would normally be celebrated that month kind of have this extra shadow observance. So actual Purim is not for another month, but little Purim is actually today. So I thought it would be fun to talk about Purim. And I'm going to start off with, I'm going to give you a quick version of the Purim story so that you know what we're talking about. So the story of Purim begins in Persia, 4th century BCE. Oh, My words, okay, great. I was like, I don't know all the words by heart. So the king Ahasuerus, throws a 180-day long party for all his subjects. He's like a little bit extra. And then there's an after party in the capital city. The king hosts the boys and the queen hosts the girls. Then the king asks his queen, whose name is Vashti, to come dance at his party. Maybe only wearing her crown. It's not really clear, but definitely it's a situation that she's not comfortable with. And so she says no. And she is maybe banished, maybe executed. That's another one where the story is not super clear. Definitely when you tell it to kids, you say banished. So now the king needs a new queen. And of course, he decides the best option is to hold a beauty pageant, because that's the way to find your partner in life and co-monarch. This girl named Esther enters the pageant. Esther is being raised by her cousin, whose name is Mordecai. I didn't see. Mordecai takes Esther wins the contest and becomes the queen, but Mordecai, her cousin slash father figure, tells her not to let anyone know that she's a Jew. At this time, it's kind of a risky thing to be. Meanwhile, this story has a lot of meanwhiles and by the ways and laters. Mordecai overhears this plot to kill the king. Some bad guys are talking about it. He tells the relevant authorities, the king's life is saved. Kind of end of that little aside. Meanwhile, also happening, there's this guy named Haman in town. He is a serious anti-Semite. He's actually from a long line of anti-Semites, the most famous long line of anti-Semites in like Jewish history. He becomes the prime minister, and he decides that everyone needs to bow down to him. Mordecai is Jewish, and Jews are only supposed to bow down to God. And Haman has this habit of wearing an idol around his neck. So Mordecai refuses to bow down to Haman. Haman has issues. And so this one guy not bowing down to him sends him into this genocidal rage, and he needs to kill all of the Jews in the kingdom. He rolls some nasty dice. It's called casting lots, which translates to Purim. And he decides to kill all the Jews on the 13th of the month of Adar. Yes, I know, it's very sad. King Ahasuerus is not really evil. I would call him criminally ambivalent. He just kind of doesn't care that this is a minor genocide, and he allows this plan to be set. Mordecai sees this obviously as a huge threat and asks Esther, he says, I know that I told you not to reveal your Jewish identity before, but now it's really necessary. Tell them who you are, save your people. Because of the rules in this kingdom, Esther is not allowed, no one is allowed to just go talk to the king, including the queen. So it's a double risk. She asks everybody to fast and pray for her, which leads us to this other minor holiday. Some people still do a fast for Esther today. So she does it anyway. She goes and she talks to the king. And it's this huge moment. And she goes to the king and he says, okay, what do you want? Success, he didn't kill her. And she, in my mind, kind of chickens out a little bit in that moment. And she says, I want to throw you a feast, you and your closest advisor, Haman. And the king says, like, okay, that's fine. And so she does, and they get to the feast. And he says, okay, you threw me the feast. Was there something you wanted to talk to me about? And again, she kind of chickens out and says, I want to throw you a second feast. That was the question I wanted to ask you, which is a little bit weird. So Haman, having been invited to this special feast thrown by the queen for him and the king, he's feeling very special. And he starts building his gallows. Specifically, he builds the gallows for Mordecai. Meanwhile, Ahasuerus, the king, can't sleep and asks to be read a bedtime story. And whoever it is that's in charge of the king's royal slumber picks up basically his diary and reads about that time that Mordecai saved his life. And the king realizes that they never really did anything about it. That story just kind of ended. The next morning, Haman comes to ask permission to kill Mordecai with these gallows he's just built. But before Haman can start speaking, Ahasuerus asks Haman, who is his advisor, what should I do for someone who I really wanted to honor? Obviously, Haman thinks it's him. So he comes up with the best thing he can. He says, put him in royal robes, put him on a royal horse, lead him through the town, and tell everyone how wonderful and special he is and how much you want to honor him. And King Ahasuerus says, great, do that for Mordecai, which is like a dagger to the heart, right? Not only is he not doing it for himself, he is doing it for this guy who he literally wants to murder. So Haman is not thrilled. So then, remember, Esther had asked for a second feast. So then Esther gets her second feast. And at her second feast, she finally musters up the courage. And the king says, what do you want? And she says, if you love me, please don't kill me and all my people, which seems like a very reasonable request. And the king, who, remember, I said wasn't really evil, completely does a 180. And he says, of course, I don't want to kill you. You're my queen and I love you. I won't kill you. I won't kill your people. I'm completely on your side. Haman instead gets hanged on his own gallows. Mordecai is given Haman's job, and all of the Jews are not killed, and instead all of the anti-Semites are killed, and we rejoice and everybody's happy. End of story. I have a friend, end of story. I have a friend who is an engineer and also Jewish. These are Hamantaschen. They are traditional Purim pastries. In America, they're said to be the shape of Haman's hat. Think of that like old tri-corner hat. In Israel, they're called Haman's ears. Apparently he had like pointy devil ears. And he's wearing a mask because you wear masks for Purim, and he's shaking a little noisemaker. You're supposed to make loud, annoying noises when you hear the villain's name. So that's my little treat at the end. So before we move on, does anybody have any questions or feelings or ideas they want to share about that story? It's okay if you don't.
In the chat, Deb says, I love the visuals.
Okay.
I would just say, my name's Bill.
Hi, Bill.
Bill Roberts. I'd just like to say it really is a very convoluted story. And,
yeah,
it's fun.
Yeah, it always kind of annoyed me. I felt like it was really poorly told. There's a lot of buildup, and then the denouement is very small, and there's a lot of, oh, by the way, and in the meantime, it's not a great flow.
How do you suppose it is has endured so long? Because of the holiday?
It's a good story.
It still is good somehow, isn't it?
And then we've got a few more contributions in the chat. Thank you all. So we've got Joseph saying they still murdered a lot of people.
True.
And then we've got Lisa saying, Ariella, why don't you tell everyone about reading the Megillah in synagogue? Sorry, I don't know if I pronounced that right. But...
Great. Go back just one slide. There we go. So the background here, it's kind of like a one scroll thing. So that's kind of a traditional look for a Megillah, which is the way that like a Torah is 2 scrolls, right? But it could also be a book or whatever. So a traditional Megillah is 1 scroll, is the traditional way that this story is held. And there are a couple of ways that you celebrate Purim, a couple of pieces, elements, a couple of mitzvot, a couple of like established celebratory elements. So one of them is you're supposed to tell the story, read the Megillah in the synagogue. And it's fun, and there's usually like a spiel, there's like a little skit. It's a fun if you dial back on the emphasis of the murder, it's a fun story to do a little play of. Kids get involved. It's fun with like the noisemakers and the costumes. I kind of liken it. It's somewhere in between like Halloween and Mardi Gras in kind of a vibe. So one of the things is you read the story, the Megillah, in the synagogue. Lisa, I don't know if there was anything else you wanted me to say about it.
And then
you know.
We have another, well, if Lisa wants to add, then she's most welcome to. We do have another question in the chat from Jana. I think, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. You're most welcome to correct me. She says, how do we reconcile the issue of not wanting to take pleasure in the pain of our enemies? And mentions an example of Passover and how we celebrate the hanging of Haman.
Jana, I feel like that's a real deep question that maybe we need to explore further later. Jana's my sister, you guys. Jana's throwing me the hard balls. It's rough. I don't know. I think it's the same way that we celebrate at Passover, actually. Maybe it's not that rough. We're not celebrating that Haman's people died. We're celebrating that we live. I think you're allowed to, I think that's okay. I think that's a distinction we can make.
Awesome. And then we've got Deb saying, FYI, when we have taught this story at Countryside, we make Hamantaschen. We should add costume.
Should definitely add costumes. Or, you know, post-pandemic, come over to Temple and join the Purim Carnival.
And that's all that's currently in the chat. I don't know if anyone has any other thoughts or reflections on the story or things that struck them, but Ariella, however you want to proceed from here.
Great, let's move forward, whichever way is forward. Okay, so there's two things I wanted to make sure that I said before we move on. Number one, as Ali mentioned at the beginning, I recognize that not everybody drinks. We're going to be talking about cocktails because another piece of Purim celebrations is literally what you were supposed to do is you were supposed to get so drunk that you can't tell the difference between the hero's name and the villain's name. So everybody loves a good cocktail at Purim, but I want to acknowledge upfront, not everybody drinks. So if this isn't something you're comfortable talking about, it's been lovely seeing you. But we're using Purim and cocktails as kind of our example. But we're going to be talking about more than just that. And even if you don't drink, if you're comfortable being in the room while we talk about it, I think you can get something out of this. And number two, I'm going to talk about these cocktails. I've never actually made them. I just thought they sounded good. I did put thought into what I thought would taste good together, but I haven't actually made it. So if you make it and it doesn't taste good, number one, tell me. And number two, I take no responsibility. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. Okay, so our first Purim cocktail is the Achashverosh. Achashverosh is Achashverosh. It's even worse if you say Achashverosh, which is the other way of saying his name. Achashverosh is the king who was in charge of the whole story, really. So King Achashverosh cocktail is arak with pomegranate simple syrup. Arak is a traditional Persian liquor. It is a harsh alcohol, but when it's tempered by the sweetness, of the syrup, just as Achashverosh shows some innate unpleasantness in how he's bought into the local culture of anti-Semitism. But is ultimately shown to be sweet and uses his power for good rather than evil. Excuse me. He's also, in my mind, a little bit simple, like the syrup. His supposedly, up until this point, lovely first wife is immediately dispatched when she won't submit to his drunken whims. He hosts a beauty pageant to choose his new queen. He is a grown man who asks to be read to when he can't sleep. He's willing to sign off on a minor genocide just because his BFF felt snubbed, and then reverse it when his girl asks him to. Ultimately, though, Ahasuerus's actions allowed the Jewish Persian community to thrive and be numerous like the many seeds in a pomegranate. Our next cocktail is the Haman. Remember, Haman's the bad guy. Haman is just a rock and soda. Haman also gets the traditional Persian liquor of a rock, but instead of being tempered by sweet syrup, it's paired with bland soda water. Haman is such a weak person that Mordecai's refusal to bow down sends him into a Napoleonic rage. He has no sweetness to him, and his weakness allows the bitterness of the cultural anti-Semitism to become the predominant attribute. Next up is the Vashti, the first queen. Whiskey and cranberry juice, no garnish. Strong and good for women, not going to get prettied up for your benefit. Vashti is our oldest feminist icon. She had the incredible strength to stand up to her husband, the king, when he asked her to do something that violated her morals. She refused to be just an object of empty beauty like garnish on a cocktail. Instead, she showed the women of Persia that sometimes, even if it's hard, you gotta do what's right for you, like drinking cranberry juice. Queen Esther. Esther is rosé champagne, gin, and a pink peppercorn simple syrup. Esther is beautiful, like pink wine and the pretty pink peppercorns. She's also sweet and has a bubbly personality. These are the traits that get her into a position of power as Queen of Persia. But Esther is also down to earth, like the earthy gin, and knows that when push comes to shove, it's the thing she's most afraid of, her Judaism, just like you're apprehensive about a drink with peppercorns, that will be her greatest strength. Thank you. Last cocktail is the Mordecai, brandy and lemon juice with a non-bendy straw. Brandy is such a dad drink, and Mordecai willingly takes on the role of Esther's father figure, even though she's his cousin. Brandy is also a slow sipping drink that will last you through the night. Just like Mordecai is almost a background character in most of the story, and yet his influence is clear in every part of the story. Mordecai is also bright, like the bright flavor of freshly squeezed lemon juice, which is how he's able to orchestrate one of the biggest upsets in history when he gets Haman, his would-be murderer, to plan a celebration honoring him instead. Of course, the whole Mordecai-Haman feud is set off when Mordecai refuses to bow, just like the straw in this drink. So that's all of our cocktails. I said that this wasn't going to be alcohol only. So if you are more into food than drinks, or if you're not into extremely long explanations that someone needs to write down for you, there's also, I did a Hanukkah dinner a couple of years ago at one of the synagogues, and we had Maccabees and cheese. Maccabees are kind of the heroes of that story. Miracle olive quinoa, the miracle of Hanukkah involves olive oil. Seleucid Greek salad. The Seleucid Greeks were kind of the anti-heroes to, not the anti-heroes, the bad guys to the Maccabees good guys. And winter Maccabeen salad. So could also go real lighthearted with this one. Oh goodness. So now I wanted to invite you guys. We all have traditional foods that we eat for holidays because that's what we're used to, or because that's what mom made. But I wanted to invite you guys to think of what are some drinks or foods that you can use to celebrate holidays and concepts in these holidays. And we're going to take notes in case anyone says something real good. Okay, I have starter ideas. Number one, I don't know why nobody eats lamb for Passover. I feel like lamb is a big part of the Passover story, and I just feel like it would make a lot of sense. Also, nobody's eating bunnies at Easter. I looked it up. So apparently, this is not something that I know, so please correct me if you know better and I am wrong. Apparently, on Jesus's grave, white lilies sprouted, and there is a cocktail that I did not invent called the white lily cocktail. And one of my favorite Hanukkah games is it a Latke? The Latke has it's there for meaning, right? I said there was the miracle of the oil. Latkes are supposed to be fried in oil. And so I like to play, is it a latke? Because arguably anything fried in oil is a latke.
We've got a couple things in the chat already. Deb put in the idea of lamb for Easter. I'm gonna add that over here. With, I assume, the connection between Jesus in Christian communities being referred to as like the Lamb of God, and yeah, connecting that to the food version of lamb, kind of like the Passover lamb. And good, Deb says yes.
Good work, Allie.
And Jana says, I tried the traditional cheese latkes from Spain last year. They pushed my definition of latkes, but were very tasty.
I remember seeing the thing about the cheese latkes.
So I'll also add, again, this is Ariellas Invitation for anybody who wants to try to think of, even if you want to start by naming a holiday or two that's important to you. And the invitation is to think of kind of how she did with the cocktails and with the Hanukkah foods, making some kind of a food or drink connection that speaks to the story of the holiday. So I know this takes a lot of creativity, but anything that anyone wants to contribute is totally welcome. Oh, it looks like Deb has another.
I see your comment about meat in Lent. I actually learned a couple of years ago, it's not even specifically avoiding meat, it is specifically eating fish. And it was originally because the fishmongers in Italy were having some serious problems. Nobody was eating enough fish, and so the Pope wanted to help support the fishmongers. And so he told, it wasn't even don't eat meat, it was you're probably going to eat meat on Fridays, I want you to eat fish instead. Which I always thought was really interesting. Well, always thought since I learned about it a couple of years ago, it was really interesting.
I like for Passover, I like abgolemono soup because it has eggs in it. It's a way to get the egg portion of the Seder into your meal.
There you go.
And what was that one more time?
Abgolemono, Ariella can spell it for you.
It's an egg, lemon, chicken, rice. Thank you, Joey. Soup. Which you should note that some people eat rice during Passover and some people do not. We were also discussing the other day that if you have a veggie spring roll and you dip it in soy sauce, does that count as dipping your green vegetable in salt water at the Seder?
Works for me.
I think a couple of years ago I put wasabi out as my bitter herb.
It looks like we've had kind of an active chat, which is wonderful. I'll highlight a couple of the things. Joseph says, Jenna makes a mean Thanksgiving cocktail. I forget the base, but it includes cranberry sauce. And let's see, we've got the spelling of the soup, which thank you for that. Eileen says something about borscht and sour cream, soup or cold drink. Is that for a particular holiday, Eileen? While we wait for a chat response or an unmuted response from Eileen, we have Sharon saying that the soup sounds wonderful. So lots of good ideas going around, it sounds like.
I don't know what Eileen was going for, but I do know that some people substitute out the lamb bone for a beet on their Seder plate. So you could arguably do borscht, which is beet soup. I don't know if that's what you were going for, but I feel like it would work.
Oh, looks like we've got a question from Sharon who asks, are there other Purim traditions?
Yes, let's see if I can remember all four. So you're supposed to hear the Megillah, hear the story, and you're supposed to give charity, and you're supposed to bring like little goodie gift bags to your friends. It's kind of like a reverse Halloween in that way. And somebody help me out.
There's a Grogger when you are listening to the Megillah. Every time you hear Haman's name, use the Grogger.
Festive meal. Thank you, Joe. Number 4 is festive meal. Yeah, and so exactly what Karen said. When normally when you're telling the story of Purim, it's really hard to get through because every time you say Haman's name, everybody shouts and boos and rolls the Grogger like the little Hamantaschen robot. And usually, at least like in American congregations, it's a good opportunity. You'll have a carnival. And so people dress up and you hear the Megillah, you watch the spiel, you watch the little skit version of the Megillah, and then everyone goes and has a little carnival of various degrees, right? Sometimes in small communities, it's like homemade booths. And I ran one in LA for a couple of years that was like 2 full parking lots of inflatables and rides and food trucks and activities. I also think it's a good opportunity to reuse your Halloween costume.
Well, I have a couple of ideas to get other people started on putting their ideas in. Even if you have some things that you're coming up with off the cuff, Ariella, since you are a very creative person, obviously. Oh, but before I do, I see Sharon has another question that is more related to the conversation that we've been having right now. Sharon asks, so how does the Little Purim compare to the bigger celebration?
This is the first year that I have acknowledged Little Purim. I don't actually know what the observance would be in perhaps an Orthodox synagogue. In my experience, it's not a thing, really. I just kind of took I was looking for a theme, so I took the opportunity.
And then Jana asks, does a Hamantaschen have to be sweet? Could a samosa, Indian triangular fried snack, be a Hamantaschen?
Jana, I'm totally with you. I attempted to make using leftover challah and leftover pesto. I attempted to make a sun-dried tomato pesto Hamantasch a couple of weeks ago. It didn't go well because I was using challah dough instead of Hamantaschen dough, but I'm totally in for savory Hamantaschen. The most traditional Hamantaschen filling that people use is I think poppy seed. I feel like that's what all the old folk go for. but most people fill it with like a jam. Some people go nuts with like Nutella or peanut butter.
Lisa
Lisa,
said,
I hear you about the goldfish from the Purim Carnival.
and then we've got Emily that she's looking forward to lunch after this, so it won't be as wonderful as the foods mentioned here. I'm glad that for those who aren't eating during this time, this is making you hungry. And looks like Deb has memories herself of friends getting goldfish. I was wondering if there are any food connections that you wanted to make to like the Jewish high holy days, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, any food connections that you would want to make with those?
So pomegranate is actually, which we mentioned earlier in the King Hashverosh cocktail. Pomegranate is a traditional Jewish New Year, high holidays food. And it's kind of funny because I feel like nobody really agrees on why. I have heard that your days should be as numerous, that there are the exact number of days in a pomegranate, number of seeds in a pomegranate as there are days in the year, which seems unlikely. I have heard that there are, yes, your pomegranates are sweet, like you should have a sweet New Year, that your days should be as many as the days in the pomegranate. So I think we just like pomegranates and they happen to be in season. My parents used to have a flowering pomegranate tree. Now they just have a pomegranate tree that you have to take our word for it. And we would always we would be able to gauge one from the other, that the high holidays were coming if the pomegranate tree was starting to look good, or when are the pomegranates coming? Well, I know the high holidays are coming, so pomegranates must be soon. I like to make there's also people like to do honey for the sweet New Year, and so I like to make my brisket for the New Year with honey. I do honey and garlic because everything's better with garlic. Okay, so now I'm gonna make you guys play Is It a Latke with me. The point of the latke is that it is supposed to help you remember the miracle of the oil. So arguably, the important part of the latke is not the potato, it's the oil, right? So by that logic, if fried potatoes is a latke, is a French fry a latke? You can vote in the chat or with your hands or with your voice. Yes, French fry is latke. Okay, is like a zucchini fritter a latke? Is like a fried mozzarella stick a latke? We've gotten, sometimes we get falafel during Hanukkah because falafel is fried. Falafel a latke. And then there's the other direction. If you bake your potato, if you bake your latke, is it still a latke? Yeah, I'm seeing a no vote. Oh, I'm seeing a yes vote for the baked potato latke. Interesting. Justify yourself. No. Yes, inclusive latkes. Karen's into the inclusive latkes. So is it a latke? It's kind of a fun way to play with if you're given your themed celebratory food, to kind of push those boundaries and see like what is actually the point of this, and how can we adjust it? How can we make it work? And in fact, in a parallel almost to the fish during Lent thing, in Israel, they do fried donuts are much more popular than fried potatoes. And it is because many years ago, the December was kind of a slow time, I guess, in the Israeli bakeries. And the bakeries needed basically a stimulus plan. And so the prime minister, someone in power in Israel, said that everyone, instead of making latkes at home, everyone should go get fried donuts, fried jelly-filled donuts, which is kind of a pain to make at home. Like donuts are just too much work to make at home. So everybody went out and bought them from these bakeries, and thus there was like a semi-natural economic stimulus for Israeli bakeries, and that's why in Israel, they are much more into the fried donuts instead of the fried potatoes for Hanukkah.
Well, it sounds like at the very least, this has made a lot of people hungry. Do you have anything else that you would like to discuss with the group or get their ideas on, or anything else? Or for the group, does anyone else have anything that they'd like to share? I see a couple things in the chat where Sharon says, this sounds like a holiday to set aside one's diet. And Karen responds, true, Sharon. Jewish holidays do tend to have a running theme of someone tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat. So, smiling faces in response to Karen's comment there. Any other contribution from you, Ariella, or that anybody else would like to mention?
Thanks for being here, guys.
And thank you, Ariella, for sharing your totally unique perspective on all of this. I think it's a really great reminder that for holidays, religious holidays, or probably other holidays as well, that either do or don't already have foods associated with them, you can always create your own, make something that is totally meaningful and sheds light on what exactly you're celebrating through the food and the drinks that you prepare for it. So I think this was a great challenge to some of us who are a little bit less creative, but maybe in planning for future holidays can creativity and forethought into the meal to make it a little bit more. And even if we stick to our old traditions that maybe don't have as much connection between foods and the holidays, this was still very informative and a lot of fun to see the ways that you made those connections, Ariella. So thank you for taking the time to share all of this with us, and yeah, sharing your gifts with us. And I'm seeing a lot of thank yous in the chat as well that I hope you see. So it was a really fun conversation. No need to take the full hour if that's not the direction that the conversation is already heading in. Yeah, without further ado, thank you once again, and have a fantastic rest of the day, everyone. Enjoy the beautiful, beautiful weather.